the last session of our meeting, you know, it's Africa Talks. But today we're going to do things differently. Instead of doing Africa Talks, we are going to have a debate. The debate, and I don't know if you got this yesterday, we are going to talk about taxes. We are going to debate about taxes. Any of you who pay taxes? All right. Do you know where it goes? So, here to talk about taxes and where it goes, hopefully, and how we can use taxes for gender equality, combating corruption, I will invite the following panelists. I know you have Frankie on your program, but Frankie has been delayed with the flight, so we're replacing Frankie with Rita Achiro. I would like to invite Rita Achiro to the podium. She's from Uganda Women's Network. She is the executive director. The other panelist is Ina Muhammad Ali. She is the director of Mark Labs, Libya. And to moderate this session, I would like to call Apollos. He's the Pan-Africa director from Oxfam International. Can you give them a round of applause? Thank you. Take it away.
Thank you. Right. I thought I was going to sit in the middle. But it's okay.
It's okay.
I hope I'm not marginalized.
It's better you sit in the middle. You want to sit in the middle?
Yeah. I thought so, but
Oh, I'm sorry.
no, it's okay.
I thought the moderator always sits at
No, I could sit at the end.
It's okay.
Wherever. We actually had to change seats so that I will not be marginalized. But also, you know, sometimes the sitting arrangement, you could be oppressed. But it's okay. Don't worry. Don't worry. But that's just some of the words that describe what women face, you know. And the fact that in the last 2 days we've been having a discussion on what needs to happen differently. I know we've had lunch. I would have loved to stand, but I know that might not be good for protocol. So I'll sit, but I'll ask you to please be as lively and as attentive as possible. This session is going to be live streamed, so we will encourage you to please tweet, send in your questions, and also your comments, because they're going to be live streamed. So you could share with your networks the hashtag Africa Against Corruption. And what's the other hashtag? The DG Trends. And also tag hashtag Oxfam Africa, or at Oxfam Africa. Oxfam Pan Africa, sorry. Apologies. Oxfam Pan Africa. And of course, share with your networks. Let them tweet in. Let them send in their questions. So as we discuss, you know, would like to hear live comments. So today's debate is about tax incentives and women's rights. And we're just trying to ask the question, do tax incentives have an impact on women's rights? You and I know that how tax is raised and spent has been a source of concern for many countries, particularly with the fact that after the Sustainable Development Goals were developed, countries were told that aid has dwindled, and that because there's dwindling aid coupled with the economic crisis, the rise of nationalism, extreme nationalism, you know, countries, particularly poor and developing countries, were asked to go and find alternative sources of money to be able to fund their national development plans or their national versions of the Sustainable Development Goals. Right kind of businesses, you know, and one of them has been tax incentives. But African countries, you know, have a host of several tax incentives, such as tax holidays, investment allowances, tax rate reductions, and they use their administrative discretion in order to attract foreign direct investments. However, in many instances, these policy decisions are not guided by proper cost-benefit and gender analysis, but rather by the intention of outdoing competitors for foreign direct investments, leading to harmful tax competition and, of course, a race to the bottom. In many countries, the picture is further complicated by the lack of coordination among agencies responsible for granting tax incentives and those concerned with raising revenue. Because of these tax incentives, a lot of girls have dropped out of school and women are forced to shoulder the responsibilities, you know, and the additional burden that comes with caring for the sick and old, as well as public services which are inaccessible. You know, in a lot of poor countries where they can't afford hospital bills because of certain tax incentives, women are the nurse. The mother is also the doctor. She's the teacher. She's the counselor. And, you know, she's everything. And that's because there's no money to pay for the services of the doctors, or you get to the hospital and they say, we're not going to touch your child until you pay the consultation fee. Is that correct? Yeah? You know, and ordinarily, basic healthcare services should be subsidized for the poorest and the excluded. Now, while big companies negotiate for tax incentives, this does not prevent them from dodging tax on an industrial scale, depriving governments further of the money, you know, that they need to address poverty and invest in healthcare, education, and jobs. Universal healthcare and education are non-negotiable. Are non-negotiable rights and the most powerful ingredients in the fight against both economic and gender inequality. But these and other essential public services are under threat across the continent because of the broken social contract between citizens and the state. And, of course, the neoliberal economic models which have, you know, eroded the needed financing for social services and exploit women and girls, you know, through unpaid labor and time, and promote increasing commercialization and corporate capture. So the question is, how does tax incentive actually impact on women's rights and their ability to partake or participate in economic activities? So our two discussant's, Iman and Rita, will be sharing with us their perspectives, and we will be following up with a number of questions. For example, there are a number of questions on our mind. One of them is, and I would just like to raise one of the questions that should help us think and trigger this discussion or this debate. Is ending the corporate tax race to the bottom and protecting corporate tax revenues is particularly important to achieving women's rights in Africa. If we want to prioritize improving women's lives, we need to acknowledge that many women are in the informal economy. How can we use incentives, Rita, to support formalization of women in the informal sector?
Good afternoon once again. Thank you very much, Apollos, for that question. I just want to say, first of all, I come from Uganda. And in Uganda we have, I must say, relatively very good policy and legislative framework. Now, you might not want to ask me why things are not working. Basically, there are a number of reasons, and I guess this might apply in many African countries as well. There is a lack of the knowledge base around the policy and the legislative framework around taxation generally, there is very limited implementation of the available legal and policy framework, let alone its monitoring and evaluation. It's one thing to have a policy and a law, it's another thing for it to be implemented, and it's another thing altogether for you to be able to track whether you're doing well or not. So the tax incentives, when we talk about tax incentives, first and foremost, it sounds so foreign to the women I work for and work with. They don't even understand what you mean about tax, what tax incentive is. Secondly, there's this misconception that tax incentives are meant for foreigners, for big companies, for multinational companies, not the local companies, let alone the small farmer or the small business people. So tax incentives many times, because of the lack of knowledge of our people, many times the beneficiaries are the multinationals, the big companies. We've had scenarios, for example, tax incentives are given to are also struggling to attract these investors. Uganda is one of those countries struggling to attract these investors. So for you to be able to attract the investors and compete with other countries in Africa, you need to be able to provide the best mechanisms. For example, you give a tax holiday and say 5 years into your commencement of your business, we're giving you tax. Yeah, I was just saying, for example, you are told to encourage business, we're giving you the first 5 years tax holiday. You will not be paying taxes. And these companies rush to countries like Uganda. Now what happens? We've had scenarios where some of these companies, 5 years later, when they're now going to start paying tax in the 6th year, they say they are not making profits. So they change the name of the company. Now, when they change the name of the company, it means they are reverting to the initial agreement because it's now a new company. Are we together? So who is losing at the end of the day? And who is benefiting from the tax incentives? The other thing, you find that most of these multinational companies, the majority of the people they employ, especially at the lower levels, are women who provide cheap labor, who are not paid NSSF or National Security Fund, who are not paid medical insurance paid for, who do not get even lunch, who are charged for the uniform they wear. If they gave you a uniform, let's say you are a security guard or you're a cook or something, and this uniform costs, let's say, $20, they will charge you for that. So at the end of the day, all the benefits that accrue as a result of the tax incentives are repatriated by the multinationals. The tax incentives disadvantage women, more especially when it comes to financing for business. I've just talked about multinationals. Many of the multinationals get the loans for the investment from their original countries. Some of them from Europe, others from Asia, and even others from Africa. But maybe with better, not even maybe, most of them with better terms. I don't know in your country, but in Uganda, accessing loans, you must have collateral. Since yesterday, we've been talking about women's land rights and land ownership. Over 80% of the land in Uganda is under customary tenure. That means it's not titled. let alone that women do not own land, according to our custom. Only 21% of women in Uganda own land in their name and with others, in association with others. So what does that mean if you are going to access loans for investment? That is going to be competitive. Already women are aged out. Those who get tax incentives most times are regulated, and this is affected particularly when you look at the informal sector. Majority of the women are in the informal sector. They are not registered. They are not recognized. And because they are not registered, they are not recognized, there's nobody who is going to give you a tax incentive. Therefore, women and small businesses continue to suffer, and they will never benefit from the tax incentives, let alone the fact that they are the majority who actually do not know about the taxes. The other thing that disadvantages women about tax incentives is the daily taxation. I don't know the countries you come from, but Uganda is a landlocked country. From the east, south, west, north, we turn around, we are landlocked, meaning we access through other countries. When our women trade with Kenya, majority of these women are caught up because they are trying to do small businesses, and they are caught up in corruption that we've been talking about. They are trying to avoid the taxes because of the lack of knowledge they have. One thing probably I need to mention, Apollos, is that because of the lack of knowledge, many of our women fall into the trap of corruption and end up losing lots of money because they think they are bribing the policeman or the policewoman or the tax collector. At the end of the day, at every stage, they are paying in East Africa what we call kitu kidogo, something small, for you to be able to pass by. We've had women who have been raped because, or they have to exchange sex for them to be able to cross the border. Just because you're carrying vegetables, crossing to Rwanda, carrying fruits, crossing to Kenya. These are the daily stories of the women we work with. While the big multinationals have these tax incentives, the majority of the women in the informal sector, as I said, they have no social protection. Our countries, and I want to mention my country, is so much in love with multinational companies that they glorify foreign investors and have forgotten the local investors. And what does that mean? The SDGs we're talking about, SDG 5, Agenda 2063, I am one of those, I don't want to be a pessimist, but I'm one of those who is convinced that we're not going to achieve it because there is no investment without the people that will bring development. Investment that does not involve its own people is no investment. Because at the end of the day, you're creating a bigger gap between the rich and the poor. And remember, the multinationals are free to repatriate all their profits. So we are going to get back to square zero. So what are the challenges of all this lack of incentives for women and incentives for direct foreign investment? One is the fact that we are perpetuating the low tax base. We have a very low tax base in Uganda. Most of our taxes are generated from indirect consumption. And what does that mean? You're taxing water, you're taxing electricity, our electricity outreach. If you go to Kampala, if you fly over Uganda in the night, you might think you're flying over some lake. Total darkness. Because the outreach is not there. You're depriving people of basic social services, the medicine that Apollo was talking about, schools. Girls are dropping out of schools because they lack sanitary towels. Last year we were in the headlines as a country because most of our girls were dropping out of school because we had put taxes on sanitary towels. So women are paying indirect tax, and it's keeping them in a vicious circle of poverty. So major commodities have become very expensive for women. Accessing basic social services, medication has become very expensive. A month ago, Uganda launched one of the most high-tech women's hospitals in Africa, women-specific. But guess what? Very beautifully built with all that technology. You walk into that hospital, you think you're in another world. But you have to buy everything once you get admitted. And you pay for it. So who is benefiting from these tax incentives? Some of my recommendations. Okay. But just to say that the tax incentives, if we do not consider deliberate efforts that each and every citizen of our different countries can actually be an investor in their own right, and they equally deserve tax incentives to generate and get our people out of that poverty, I think we are doing a disservice to our people. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks, Rita. That's really helpful. Seriously, and we'll be sort of zeroing in on that. And I like your point when you said that women are taxed indirectly and taxed for essential services or goods like sanitary pads. I saw something like that, how women are suffering because and they are not giving tax incentives simply because they think that what they do is practically insignificant to the economy. We've seen that in countries like Zimbabwe, and then we saw how women had to pay for sex if they couldn't pay tax rates at borders in some countries. There was a country where I worked, I was managing 2 countries, so you had to cross the border. The men could cross with their goods. You had these men who carried bread, tea, eggs. So at the border, they sell them in the night. No one disturbs them. They just pay a little. But when the woman is doing the business, the man says, oh, you have to give me 2 loaves of bread as your tax, or you pay through sex, And the woman says, oh, you wait, let me finish. And then by 11 p.m., when she's very tired and she needs to go and look after her baby, the border guard says, now come and pay, So women have suffered a lot. We're quite concerned about this, but my question is, are we stretching this debate too far by saying that, these incentives actually affect women? And Ina, I'm asking you this because that's critical. Is our analysis too stretched? Because, so for example, there's been sweeping the house, cleaning up the place, and all that. And she has to do that and then still get across and save some money or earn some money that she needs to go to the market, with the same man who actually doesn't do any of this unpaid care work, but, spends all his time making money, and they both go to the same market. At the market, no one is going to say, well, yeah, you were looking after a baby, so I'm going to reduce the cost for you. So what should be done about it? Is it really important at all for as far as unpaid care work is concerned? And what sort of tax incentives can governments do, to cover that aspect of women's lives so that women are able to have an equal footing as men, in participating in economic activities?
Well, do you want to use this? Oh, no, I think it's on. Yeah. You're raising a very important question. And I just want to start with filling on to what Rita said, and actually what we've heard several times today, and that is education. So I think collaboratively, we have to think about this. How can we bring this into our education? How can we bring this into leadership, knowledge about taxes, bringing more girls into education? But this is a topic that we can zoom into another time. How this affects women in several ways. And the first one is that women are overrepresented in low-income jobs, which means that if the budgets are low, right? I mean, every country has a budget. Why do we need taxes to fill up our budgets? Why do we give these companies tax incentives to indirectly gather more money from income taxes? So what do they do when they need more money is they raise their VATs. They raise their income taxes. And if you're already earning low, it impacts you very much, impacts you more than somebody who earns a mid-wage. Since women are the ones that are earning low, it also hits them the hardest. And the second point is, of course, the VAT tax. We've just heard several examples about VAT and how it impacts women in the smallest ways. Moreover, if we have low budgets and if we have to increase our taxes, we don't increase them for the corporations, we increase them for our people. Which means that if we have low taxes, also the right public services are not there. So women spend a lot of time walking up and down to get water, to access basic public services, and often they're not even there because we don't have the financial resources to actually put them in place. Just like the hospital where a company needs to bring it in, but everything is paid for. Everything has to be paid for. And then with regards to them being bearers of unpaid cared work, it means that they have to get in and out of jobs. It means that they cannot build a career. It means that they often can't access pension, or they can't build up pensions, which puts them into even further poverty when they're older. And because of these tax incentives as well, we can't build a welfare state that provides a cushion for these people. So what this means, if we compare it, I was raised in Europe, and over there, when you're old and your family can't take care of you, the state takes care of you. If there's somebody sick and you want to have them at home and take care of them, you get paid for the work that you're actually doing. If you are sick, you get paid for the days that you're sick. You're on sick leave. And like that, several other ways where you have something to rely back on. But how is that paid for? That's all paid by taxes. By taxes by the public, but more importantly, the taxes that come from bigger corporations, because they can pay the big amounts. They make use of our resources, they make use of our infrastructure, and they also need to pay for the use of that. And then lastly, we've talked about the informal sector and women owning businesses. If you compare women owning businesses and the taxes that they pay versus corporations and how much tax they pay, it's really ridiculous. It's really ridiculous. And how much they actually are like run behind it as government officials, as institutions, they run behind the small fish to pay their taxes, while the big fish are left all behind. And again, I want to say that this is not, it's a situation that affects women, especially in developing countries. But the whole disparity between individuals paying a lot of taxes and corporations paying little taxes is a worldwide phenomenon. It's something that we're trying to combat all over the world. And I will give you a small example of a Chelsea football player that closed a £15 million deal last week in the UK. He will have to pay £500,000 of taxes every month. Every month. So at the end of it, he will be paying at least 1/3 of his income on taxes. 6 million, yes. While at the same time, a company like Amazon only paid £1.7 million on £79 million profit in 2017. So you see the immensity of this, and you see how much impact this has, and how much countries are foregoing. So your question was, what can we do? Well, one, we need to start making sure that these corporations pay what they have to pay, and that dues are done. Because you said that they're fighting for investors. Different countries are trying to get more investors into their economies. Well, firstly, research shows that if an investor really wants to invest in a country, they will do it. 93% will do it. Secondly, investors usually look at the bigger picture. They don't only look at tax incentives. They look at opportunity, they look at safety, they look at infrastructure, they look at a lot of different things that we should be focusing on as African countries. If we have that big infrastructure, if we can provide those opportunities for those investors without the tax incentive, they will also come. And then beyond that, we need to start building our welfare states. We need to be able to provide these safety nets for these women. And lastly, which is the point that I started with at the very beginning, education. And it's actually a shame, because we've talked about it so many times today, that we don't have any ministers of education here, or anybody who works in education that we can talk with, and that we can see with, how can we move forward in this way.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. I thought, you raised some very important points. And one key point that I heard is that we should provide safety nets for women in particular. So I look at the economy. I look at a lot of developing countries, particularly countries on the continent, where we see a lot of private sector investments, from oil and gas to mining to agriculture, like cocoa, coffee, tea, rubber, a lot of that. I'd like to pick on one particular country where it was as if they created what you call the special economic zones, the economic zones for these companies. Now, they gave these companies tax incentives. And what they did was they built a very big hospital. The company built a very big hospital and was able to import drugs and hospital equipment for free, because it was part of the deal that it struck with the government. And so the company employees, who are mostly men, because they have to tap the rubber, women were not doing that. We're going to the hospitals free of charge and paying very little. But there was a government hospital that was very large, and it's still there, and it was supposed to provide basic healthcare services. But everybody who went there had to pay, particularly women. And that's because the children and the women were the ones who were getting more sick, and going there. Now, here's the thing. Why would a government consider giving tax incentives to companies, but not giving incentives to the people, particularly women and children, to be able to access, you know, basic drugs or basic healthcare services. You know, what can the government do to review some of these special economic zones that have an impact on women, you know, particularly? And I like the point where we talked about that women are mostly in the informal sector. So the government gives tax incentives to these people, and like you said, women are actually overrepresented in the low-income paying jobs. And that's where the government collects most of its taxes from payee, that's pay as you earn, or through VAT, you know, and all that. And the government taxes anything and everything as long as it will give money for them, from sanitary pads to even women's innerwear. And then women were saying, look, we can't even dress up again because even our innerwear has been taxed. But yet, these private companies were getting tax breaks, and everyone is actually enjoying, they're making more money, and there's huge capital flight. What do we need to do to review all this, to make sure that women are protected in an economy that is practically fragile, and where more than 60% of the taxes that come in, particularly from the low-income earners, are actually paid by women? So I think that's a dilemma that we need to think about. But let me give you another side of this story. There's the other side of the argument that because of these private sector investments and the fact that government has been able to give tax incentive and attract FDIs, that the economy is better. More jobs are being created, and like one minister said, look, don't worry about these women. Their husbands are getting more jobs, so their husbands are looking after them. Yeah? And so we shouldn't necessarily worry about them because it has a trickle-down effect. Since we are creating more jobs through FDIs and the men are getting the jobs, then the men are looking after their wives. So why are we worried? Yeah? That after all, if you go to the market, you don't see the men in the market. It's the women who flood the market. So who is giving the women the money? It's their husbands. Yeah? So there's actually the trickle-down effect, and there's also the second part of that argument that actually it is based on merit. Women cannot get high-paying jobs because they are not educated, like you said. And the idea is that who forced them not to go to school? They chose to do other things, but the men chose to go to school. So that way, the men are getting the jobs, and the women have refused to be educated because that's their lot. So we've seen a lot of that argument, and these are not fables. These are statements from high government officials who, in one way, have discussed. And you will think that this was happening like 1965, 1970. No, it was happening as recent as 2016. As recent as 2017, as recent as 2015, the question is, what do we do? Is there something that is wrong? Is it a behavior change problem, or is it a policy issue that needs to be addressed? I'll leave both of you.
Well, that's a mouthful. I just have 4 issues to that, Apollos. One, it's the last thing you ended with, behavioral. We need a mentality shift, a serious mentality shift, and this must start with our leaders. When I say leaders, of course, from the highest, but also leadership at all levels. This idea that development can only occur when we have assistance must stop. And if at all we should get this assistance, it must be assistance that is negotiated and mutually beneficial. The reason why we are seeing the scenario that you properly painted, Apollos, is really the thing that has brought us here. Corruption. Somebody somewhere is benefiting from this for their own good. And that's why they continue to think investment, and big-time investment for that matter, can only be done and brought by some foreigner. So corruption, mentality shift is crucial. Taking leadership and good governance is central in this. There is being a leader, but are you actually working with the principles of good governance? Are you governing your people using those principles? Corruption is at the center. We have this joke in Uganda that if Uganda was to develop because of the laws and policies we have, would have developed like 40 years ago. Gender-sensitive laws, gender-sensitive policies, gender-sensitive infrastructure, gender-sensitive everything. Uganda led Africa for a long time in terms of sensitivities of laws and policies. But what is the problem? And that scenario plays in many African countries. The other that I talked about earlier on is the issue of financial accessibility. The interest rates in Africa are just abnormal for any investment, for any local investor. Right now, I don't know what it is like in your country, but in Uganda, it oscillates between 17 to 23%. Who is going to take that type of loan to invest? And do you think you will actually succeed? Statistics in Uganda show that about 60 to 70% of businesses fail before their 5th birthday. The local businesses. So how are we going to grow investment in that environment? While you'll find a multinational is accessing a loan interest of 1%, 3%. And that's the loan they have to pay back home. They are making abnormal profits, close to 100%. Remember, they're paying people low income, because the other thing I didn't say, Apollos, is that these multinationals are not only benefiting from tax incentives, they are also benefiting from others, including free land. And people are being depossessed. People are being made landless. Who are the majority of these people? 80% of our population live off land on a daily basis. Over 70% of those people are women and children. When people are compensated for land, who owns the land? Remember, I said only 21% of women own land in Uganda. Only about 1% in the entire world of land is owned by women. So even where there's compensation, it's the men who are compensated. What does that mean? The women and children are left landless. We have a huge population of men moving now into the urban areas. I don't know what it is like in your country, but if you came to Uganda, and more so in the urban cities, we have this business called Boda Boda, the motorbikes. You'll find young men between the ages of maybe 16, 18, 30 at most, all riding Boda Bodas, including graduate teachers who have left the classroom now and have gone to ride Boda Bodas. So these people sold land, or they were compensated for land. So the incentives are not necessarily the taxes, which they keep on changing the company names as and when they deem fit. The last one, Apollos, is the fact that, and which links to my first point of leadership. Do our leaders really think about big-time investment? Because the investment is actually in the people, human capital. unless we have quality education, an education that is relevant for our people and for our own needs. Statistics show that, especially in Uganda, we have more graduates than ever that we are channeling out of universities. But where are these people being absorbed? The jobs are not there. What type of training are we offering to the young people? Recently, one professor told me and said, but Rita, you see, you're talking about gender equality. You're making so much noise. You know, the other day in Makerere, now we have more girls in law school than boys. And I said, are you surprised that we have more girls? Should that even be an issue for you? He said, yeah. You know, now there are more girls graduating. Even in medical school, there are more girls. I said, so what is the population? What is the ratio of men to women in this country? He said it's about 49 to 51%. So I said, are you surprised that there are more girls in law school? Does that surprise anybody? It shouldn't. It should be automatic that that 51% should be reflected in law school, medical school, education school, whatever school. And that is the point at which we want to reach. So if we are an agrarian economy, Uganda, Africa, I don't know how many of us in Africa have reached the Abuja, the Abuja Declaration. Is it 10, 15% for agriculture? 10%. In Uganda, we are around 4-6%, and yet we say 80% of our people depend on land. So where is our own investment? Shouldn't we be investing in agriculture, mechanizing, value addition, creating jobs for our people, widening the tax base, improving? Because the more you create jobs, you widen the tax base. The more you widen the tax base, you improve the social services. The more you improve social services, the more girls and women go to school, the more they have better health, the more the empowered the society becomes. And I think that is where we ought to be going.
Thanks. I just wanted to reiterate the point that, you know, I feel very sad when I listen to all the challenges that both of you have mentioned. And one thing comes to my mind, and that's feminomics. Yeah? And I say to myself, feminomics, I mean, I don't know if I'm the best person to define what that means, but it's about putting women at the center of economic activities and making sure that they are demonstrating leadership. Now, when you talk to our governments across the continent, they talk about Agenda 2063. There's the AU gender strategy. There are national gender strategies. There are women small business funds. There are women small-scale farmers funding programs that support women. We've seen that there's the AU program on empowering women in agriculture. There's also the Women Initiatives program across several countries. The question is, why are these things not working? And how can we expand the economic choices that women can make so that they have wider space and wider options to develop like the men?
That's a very good question. And I think you're doing it short when you say that they're not working. I think they're just working very slowly and very limitedly because they're so dependent on external funds, while we want to be more interdependent on our own policies, on our own strategies, on our own culture, because all of these nuances, they affect the way that women take a role in the country. And when you earlier mentioned the argument of one of the politicians about women choosing to do something else beyond education, like I felt my stomach twisting, because that is one of the problems that we have, that there is such a disparity between the world that women live in and the world that men think women live in. It's so far from each other, and I think we need to close the gap as Magda said earlier, by having all of these men engage in the conversation. And I wanted to actually answer the question that you asked before, and that is, how can we redistribute using taxes and tax incentive? Because tax can be used as a tool for good as well, right? So how can we make sure that these women that actually need the support actually get the support? Whether that is when they go to hospitals or when they try to access education, whatever it is. And we should be able to do that. But before we can do that, we need to take a step back, and we need to talk about data. And we need to talk about e-governance. And we need to talk about being able to know where these women are and what their needs are, and how we can streamline that and give them the right access to the things that they need. Because if we have a database about women that need healthcare that can't pay for it because of their income, then you can subsidize that by, for example, giving them health insurance that is state-backed, right? Then you eliminate that problem for them. But to be able to do that, we need to take a step back and look at our structure internally first, to be able to move forward. And I think this is something that we haven't, we've mentioned it, but we haven't talked about it very in depth yet, is data, access to information, technology, and how it can be used to combat corruption, but also make the life of a lot of people easier in different ways. And then with regards to the informal sector and women there, we need to educate women on taxes, and that they should be they should register themselves, and also give them the necessary tax breaks. I know that a lot of countries worldwide, they provide tax breaks for small companies that earn up to a certain threshold. They don't have to pay taxes at all. If you, beyond that, earn more than that, then you start paying taxes in tranches, which would also help them in moving along and actually being able to sustain themselves better. And I think that is what I have to say right now.
Great, thanks. I was watching Sky News this morning, and I was listening to a small outfit that was working on training young women on how to manage their funds and give them tax breaks so that they're able to become what they call junior managers of themselves and also gain employment. And what they found was, of all the women and men they trained, women were able to increase their income by 28%, but the men were able to increase their income by only 6%. You know, I thought that was good. And I said to myself, I think it's important that we begin to see the power of women. So my question, and this is listening to both of you, maybe now it's time for us to hear from the rest of us in the room. What more can we do with tax incentives to favor our women? What more can we do with tax incentives to ensure that women have wider economic choices, you know, and can make them and can have equal footing like the men to engage in economic activities and achieve their dreams? You know, what more should we do, or should the government do to ensure that tax incentives are favoring women? I think that's a question that we would like the audience to now answer, and we will then ask our panelists to give us also feedback from their own perspectives. Sorry. Okay, so are there hands? Yeah, there are plenty of hands. Okay, so we're going to take the first 5. So Inam will now have that responsibility of choosing who she wants.
First lady, yes. Second lady, and then the guy next to her, yes. And then Dabo, and the woman at the back, at that side. You, yay, you. That's 5.
Okay, so that's 5. So let's have number 1.
Me.
And please say your name and your organization.
Good afternoon. My name is Crystal Simeoni. I work with Femnet. I'm the Economic Justice Lead. I've been thinking a lot about South Sudan, and I'll give you a few statistics. 73% of girls aged 6 to 11 are not in school. Over 90% of women cannot read or write. South Sudan is the world's fastest growing refugee crisis, with over 1.84 million internally displaced and over 2.47 million in neighboring countries. This month, South Sudan hosted 400 oil and gas companies in Juba. They are now offering tax incentives of over 10 years of a tax holiday. And I wanted to mirror the situation of what's happening with women and girls in South Sudan and what 10 years of a tax incentive of a multi-billion-dollar oil industry would mean. And when you ask, what can we begin to do? And I would like to ask the South Sudanese government, and I'm trying not to look to my left, is how do we put people, how do we put citizens first? How do we make sure that we're ensuring that the lives of women and girls of South Sudan are catered for, that we're making sure that they go to school, they have quality basic health and education, that they're living lives of dignity before we start giving tax incentives over 10 years to multinational companies. South Sudan is amongst the top 4 oil producers on the planet. And so for multinationals, if you're looking for oil, you're going to go to South Sudan. You don't have an option. And so your tax incentive is a cherry on the top, but it's not an impetus for them to decide whether or not they're going to be investing in South Sudan. They will be looking at the peace agreement that was signed this year. They will be looking at infrastructure. They will be looking at a whole range of things. A tax incentive is the last thing they're going to be looking at. And so how do we make sure that they're putting the people of South Sudan before multinationals?
Thank you. Number 2, please.
Okay. Thank you. Kindly be informed that I am gonna speak in Arabic, so use translation, please. Okay, shall I start?
Yes, please.
أنا إسراء يونس من مصر. حابة أتكلم بس في الموضوع ده إن المشكلة مش الضرايب مين اللي بتأثر بيها السيدات ولا الرجال. المشكلة إن إحنا محتاجين أصلاً نظام ضريبي يحرص على إن هو يكون في عدالة ضريبية. تمام. المفروض بنشوف الممتلكات اللي بيمتلكها كل الافراد، نشوف اذا كان فعلا هم قادرين ان هم يدفعوا الضرائب دي ولا لا. الاجر في النساء بتتقاضى اجور متدنيه، دي يمكن المشكله، عشان كده بيبان اكتر ان السيدات يعني بتنال منها الضرائب بشكل اكبر. الموضوع ده بيرجع في الأساس النساء ما بتحصلش على نفس الفرص اللي بتحصل عليها الرجال في العمل. فممكن نقول الأول المشكلة بس في الإعلام. الأول هو لما بيجي بيمثل المرأة هي إما بتكون ربة منزل لا تعمل لا تتقاضى أجر، أو إنها أداة للإثارة، أو إنها مجرد شخص متمرد على القيود وعلى العادات. فعشان كده تلاقي كل الناس او كل السيدات بيرفضوا ان هم يمتثلوا للشخصيه الظاهره في الاعلام بالشكل ده. النساء في القرى التعليم لا يهتموا بالتعليم. بالنسبه للقاصرات بتزوج القاصرات في وقت مبكر جدا، ولا يحصلن على التعليم المناسب، لذلك لا يحصلن على الوظائف. في مشكلة برضو، مشكلة الميراث. ممكن تلاقي أولياء الأمور بيتكلموا في بيكون في تهديدات أو من لهم سلطة على هؤلاء النساء القاصرات، من يتوفى زوجها تزوج إلى أخيه على سبيل المثال. لذلك فهي شخص مستضعف. في هذه الحالة نجد أن أيضا بعض فرص العمل ليست متوفرة لجميع النساء، مثل القضاء أو الهيئات السيادية. لا تحصل سوى على فرص العمل أو الوظائف التي لا تتقاضى عليها أجور عالية، برغم من أنها مؤهلة لتلك الوظائف. على سبيل المثال من يتخرجون من كلية الحقوق ويحصلون على التقديرات العالية وهم كفء لهذه الوظائف، توجد في هذه الحالات بعض التفرقة بين الجنسين، برغم من القانون المصري في المادة 11 بيكفل حقوق المرأة في ان هي تقيد في جميع المناصب في الدولة، الا انه في بعض الهيئات زي مجلس الدولة او القضاء العسكري برغم من ان هي تقدر تدخل الاماكن دي بس مش بتعين. فهي مش فكرة وجود بس قوانين، القوانين دي مش متفعلة تمام. فمحتاجين ان المرأة تدخل كل المجالات وما يكونش فيه ما نبصش لده دي سيدة او ده رجل. المفروض ان دايما بنتعامل على مبدأ الكفاءة. الاساس في الموضوع ده مش ان هو احنا محتاجين عدد معين من السيدات مثلا يشغلوا البرلمان او المؤسسات. في الاغلب دي بتكون نسبة ظاهرية، ما بيكونش فيه اي تطبيق لفكرة العدالة. ممكن نتكلم على المساواة تمام، كلهم يعني في عدد معين لكل فئة، بس ده أفضل العناصر من العناصر الغير مؤهلة في الأساس. فهو الأساس في كل ده إن هم يحصلوا على تعليم كويس، بعد كده نتيح لهم الفرصة إن هم يتقلدوا كل المناصب أيا كانت إيه هي، طالما هي ملائمة ويقدروا إن هم يقوموا بيها. أهم حاجة يكونوا قادرين إن هم يأدوا الوظائف بفاعلية. بعد كده نبدأ نقرر مين يشتغل ومين الأكفأ بأن هو ياخد المنصب ده، بغض النظر عن وضعه إيه، نوعه إيه. تمام؟ Sorry?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Those are very excellent points. Number 3 now, right?
Yeah, thank you. My name is Okeke Anya. I work with the State of the Union Coalition. The question, what more can government do for women? At times, I'm tempted to just say that, can government just leave women the way they are? Because why do I say this? I've come to situations whereby, especially women that are in the informal sector, you find government creating all manners of politicians. When they go into government, create all manners of groups to come and to start extorting money from women in different names, calling it levies, calling it fees, and the rest of them. And when they suddenly have a brainwave, they come out again to destroy whatever businesses these women have. So it becomes worrisome for me. And that is why I say that at times I just wonder, can you please just leave these people alone to manage their lives? Or you go to the streets. Most of us here some of us that came from Nigeria stay in Abuja. You find out that these people, they say no street trading. But you see people trading on the street because you've not provided the necessary incentives for them to trade elsewhere. And suddenly you come out and you are destroying people's property, you are destroying their goods, you are destroying their wares and the rest of them. So I think one of the things probably government could do is to begin to find a kind of avenue to identify these women and also provide for them where they could do their businesses. The other one is that to begin to identify and make them understand the ones that they can call, this is actually money that you are expected to pay as a levy. Any other person that comes to you for any other kind of levy, don't pay. And create a kind of receipt that can show that you have paid. Because what you see that people just come in, go into the market, and funny enough, the government will behave as if they don't know. But they really know these people. They send them out. These monies never go into the system. So I think our government should begin to look deeply into this kind of situation, or just leave the women alone to find a way of taking care of themselves. Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks, Okeke. That's number 4, right? Okay.
Thank you. I think what governments can do, I'll also say what we can do as the people. I think it's time we start pushing governments to start reporting on the cost of tax incentives. I think it's time that when our ministers of finance are coming to read the budget, let them give us the tax incentives as a cost expenditure in the budget. We need to start pushing for this. We need to start pushing our governments to also start applying negative incentives to companies that are not respecting women's rights especially. Why should you receive a tax incentive and still charge someone fees for a uniform that he or she is going to wear when he's coming to work for you? I think, and we have statistics. For example, I'm just reading through Uganda, where my sister comes from, and she spoke to this. The Uganda Revenue Authority reported a loss from tax incentives and exemptions amounting to $3,073 million from 2010 to 2016. And the amount of revenue lost in 2016-2017 financial year was nearly equal to the agricultural budget. So you can imagine how much we are losing as a country, we are losing as a continent. Reports show that Nigeria spends $2.9 billion on tax incentives, twice as much as it does on education. And then we give tax incentives saying that companies are coming to create jobs. What kind of jobs do they create? In Nigeria, for example, they removed a quota for limiting expatriates that come to work in some of the multinationals that they're giving incentives to. So we're left with we're left to work as laborers, manual laborers in this particular company. I think as citizens, it's time we start talking about this. It's time we start calling our governments to cost the incentives. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And the 5th person, is that, yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. My name is Uchenna Idoko.
Sorry?
Merci beaucoup pour la parole. Merci beaucoup pour la parole. Ça fait depuis le matin, je voulais parler, mais on me privait toujours la parole.
Madame, s'il vous plaît, Madame Anton. I thought we had. Okay, this is number 5, so it's not this other person. Okay, Voici.
Je disais merci beaucoup pour la. Okay.
No, but allow her to speak. Allow her to speak. It's okay. Allow her to speak. Madame, vas-y. We're listening.
Merci beaucoup pour la parole. Je disais que c'est depuis le matin que je demandais la parole, mais la parole m'a été arrachée depuis le matin. Je suis Madame Bibiche, venue de la République démocratique du Congo. Je disais, concernant tous les exposés qui ont été passés depuis le matin, concernant la femme, je dis que en République démocratique du Congo, la femme vraiment est en difficulté. Je suis dans le même avis que notre panéliste, le monsieur qui était le matin, qui disait qu'il faut d'abord l'éducation de la femme. Et donc, en RDC, c'est un besoin vraiment qui est capital. Donc, la femme n'est pas instruite, la femme est analphabète. Et si nous descendons jusqu'à la base, où l'éducation la femme n'est pas éduquée, et comment elle va défendre ses droits alors qu'elle n'est pas éduquée, elle est analphabète. Et donc, il faut, à partir de là, il faut commencer par l'éducation de la femme. Et donc, je suis dans même accord que notre panéliste du matin. Je disais qu'il faut d'abord l'éducation de la femme. Il faut d'abord éduquer la femme pour qu'elle connaisse d'abord ses droits. Parce qu'elle ne connaît pas même pas ses droits. Comment elle va défendre ses droits alors qu'elle est analphabète? D'ailleurs, la fille n'est pas autorisée d'étudier dans le milieu rural. Et donc, la femme est pénalisée des études. Là, on dit que la fille n'a pas droit aux études, ce n'est que le garçon qui est autorisé d'étudier. Et donc, à commencer par là, il faut d'abord commencer par éduquer la fille pour qu'elle aille à la base comment elle va défendre ses droits à partir de la base. Ça, c'est la première chose. Deuxième chose, concernant les mécanismes et les affaires pour la corruption. Je donne l'exemple seulement. Nous, la République démocratique du Congo, c'est un pays plus riche que j'avais dit encore en Mauritanie. Nous sommes très riches, mais pauvres. Pauvres en matière palpable. Mais où est-ce que notre richesse part? Nous sommes, la femme, elle est étouffée. Elle est étouffée par les hommes, elle est étouffée par le gouvernement. Parce que la femme n'a même pas le droit de parler. Et si elle parle, c'est un problème. Et vous voyez la femme qui vend des tomates. En passant par la frontière, il y a beaucoup de taxes qu'il faut payer. Il y a au moins 25 taxes qu'il faut payer. Il y a l'INSS, il y a l'OFIDA, il y a tout ça. Il achète les tomates de $10 par exemple, mais il va dépenser au moins $5 de taxes. À combien il va gagner pour faire vivre les enfants? Et alors, c'est elle qui est là pour faire vivre les enfants. L'homme est là seulement pour attendre et après la femme arrive à la maison, c'est elle qui va nourrir les enfants. Vous voyez maintenant qu'il faut que le gouvernement prenne ses dispositions de voir comment éduquer même les entreprises ou les maisons, les entreprises publiques, par exemple l'OFIDA, par exemple l'ONCC, tous ces maisons-là, ça se trouve dans les frontières. Nous sommes en relation avec le Rwanda. Quand ils traversent au Rwanda, aller acheter les beignets ou les tomates pour venir les vendre à Bukavu, et là, ils vont dépasser trop de taxes par rapport à son moyen ou bien à son capital qu'elle a. Et donc, d'abord, il faut que le gouvernement prenne ses dispositions. En regardant d'abord les infrastructures aussi, les routes sont foutues en RDC. Comment la femme va partir? Elle peut partir, aller par exemple acheter les nourritures en distance, parce que la route, il faut faire au moins 4 jours en route, 1 mois en route pour faire une distance de 50 km par exemple. Vous voyez d'abord que nous sommes dans des difficultés. Donc il faut voir comment le gouvernement peut prendre ses dispositions par rapport à ses responsabilités et voir comment la femme doit être mise à sa position ou bien à ses droits. Il faut que la femme d'abord sache comment il va défendre ses droits. Et ce que je voulais dire, donc en RDC, nous avons un problème très sérieux. Pour le moment, nous sommes en train de préparer les élections. Mais la femme est étouffée. Et ils ont postulé, mais ils n'ont pas l'argent pour faire les campagnes. Il faut que ce sont les politiques, les hommes politiques qui embrassent qui cachent leur argent et ils ne donnent pas aux femmes les moyens. Ils appellent seulement venez dans nos partis politiques pour les utiliser et ils ne donnent pas les moyens pour qu'elles aussi puissent faire les campagnes. Mais qui va voter l'autre sans faire les campagnes? Ils vont faire les campagnes avec quoi? Voilà les difficultés que nous avons. Nous sommes étouffés par les hommes politiques, nous sommes étouffés aussi par le gouvernement. Il faut que le gouvernement prenne sa disposition pour mettre la femme dans ses droits. Je dis et je vous remercie.
Let her speak. So the other.
Okay.
Yes, please.
Good afternoon. My name
And that's
is
the final
Uche.
person, eh?
Yeah, finally. So, my name is Uche. From Nigeria. I work for Center for Gender Economics. So you asked what can government do to give some incentive to women.
Can you speak a little
Tax
bit more
incentive.
into the microphone, please?
Tax incentive to women. Okay, a number of them. One, I feel the first and foremost is that our tax officials in our different governments, they do not understand that taxation is not gender neutral. They have this belief that tax, just like they say money is, gender neutral. I remember in PAC 2018, one of my country tax officials said for the first time in 17 years of being a tax official, this is the first time he's hearing about making taxation gender sensitive. And when we got back to Nigeria, he followed up, and it's because they're doing tax reform right now, and he's beginning to do a whole lot of things we raised at PAC 2018. So I think the first thing first is that our tax officials need to understand, need to be trained, sensitized, to know that taxation is not gender neutral. And then secondly, when it comes to tax incentive to multinationals, then taxation becomes homogeneous. It's just one tax incentive, one type of taxation that they pay at their level. But at the SME level, women pay multiple taxation levies, just like my brother Kike said. So which one are we talking about when it comes to giving them incentive? Because you might give them incentive for the lesser ones, and they have another big one to pay. And that's what makes their SMEs keep shutting down every other time. So I think another thing government should do is to unify those taxes. Let them unify, let the tax institutions come together and unify this multiple taxation going on across Africa, and it is not helping women entrepreneurs. And then thirdly, I think for the multinationals that are receiving tax incentive, there should be strong agreement on what they will give back. And key monitoring, and let them show their scorecard at the end of the year. All we need here in the media is, oh, they received, MTN has tax incentive. The shop owners of ShopRite in my country, they have for 10 years. These for 10 years. And we never hear what they're going to do back. Some of them, like, go and renovate primary schools that is already existing and don't furnish them. So we need some level of scorecard to show this is what you've done, this is the tax incentive you received, and we begin to monitor it as civil society organization and report back so that it's clear to everybody that the incentive is actually working or not working. And then we'll have some level of hold or data to say stop it or continue. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. We are pressed for time, so we're going to try and wrap up now. And sorry if you've not been able to speak. I'll ask you to tweet your points or to send them in, and they'll be picked up. But I'm going to ask the panelists to give us their parting shot for just 30 seconds each, and then I'll sort of give us a summary of what we've said today. So Rita, 30 seconds. Inam, 30 seconds.
Okay, thank you. Quickly, I think for me, what is clear is that the process of tax exemption has to be clear at national level for everybody to understand who qualifies for tax exemption. There is also need for us to have a database of the taxable taxpayers, and this can be reinvested. I talked about transforming the production units to increase our tax base as a continent. And the other is the gender audits on tax and tax use and its implication. And I think my sister from Nigeria has brought that up. It's very important. These tax holidays, how is it being used and what are the implications in regard to gender? Lastly, educate, simplify, advocate, and review the laws that we have to avoid exploitation of our people. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Rita. And Ina, please.
There are three main points that I want to make. Firstly, with regards to the last point that Madame made, and that is gender-sensitive taxing. To be honest, I do not agree with that. I think taxes should be income-based and need-based, whether that is for men or for women. We're here striving for equality, and that means that also should be equal. We do need to think about the women that are marginalized and how taxes are impacting them. But we also have a lot of men that are in similar situations, so we shouldn't forget about those. Then about the point that Jabo made, we need to push our government to be more transparent with regards to tax and tax cuts that they're making, to who they're giving it and what we're losing out on. Because knowing that, with, of course, knowing what our rights are and what the current situation is within the country is very important. And then lastly, we have to make sure that it's simple. We have to make sure that our taxes are simple, that women can engage with them, that marginalized community can engage with them, that they're straightforward, and that they are fair. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And we've had a very interesting discussion this afternoon, and I just wanted to share with us a few things that were coming out from all those discussions. First of all is the fact that we see that the regulatory and policy environment is not in favor of our women. So the tax incentives are actually marginalizing the women more. And we're seeing that in a lot of these countries, governments have lost lots and billions of dollars to tax incentives, monies that could have been spent on supporting women's rights, their health, their education, but also the welfare of the people, and creating social safety nets. There's also the fact that we're seeing that the laws and policies do not give women equal opportunities like men, and other policies that support the violation of women's rights, like early marriage, issues of the fact that limiting women's access to education, the fact that women don't own property, so it's difficult for them to access loans, and some of these tax incentives have direct and indirect impact on women. We had the case of South Sudan and the fact that if the South Sudan government has now agreed to give 10 years of tax incentives to oil and gas company, incentives that they do not need to give, then you're giving room for more harmful practices against women and children. And we also saw the fact that countries are losing huge amounts of money, and of course, they're also losing human capital, most of them which are women. Some of the recommendations that have come forward is that we should use data, and that these companies must now report on the cost, governments must now report on the cost of tax incentives and how much they are giving away as tax incentives, particularly during the budget statement that is usually made at the beginning of the fiscal year. The other is around clear agreements between these multinationals and governments on what they're going to do or what they're going to give back, through these tax incentives, and with a clear monitoring mechanisms by civil society and government on how that is working and who's benefiting actually from the tax incentives. We had a diverse opinion that tax should not be gender-based, but should be based on income and needs, because it impacts on both men and women. And if it's based on income and needs, it means that there are certain women who are earning very high and should be taxed progressively, because it's not just the women who suffer. And there's also the fact that we need citizens to stand up and begin to demand better accountability of our taxation and how tax is used. And I like the point on applying negative tax incentives on companies that do not support women's rights, And that's critical. So government should be able to say to these companies, because you do not respect women's rights, then we will apply negative tax incentives. Either by withdrawing certain incentives that allow you to employ, or certain incentives that reduce your tariff on import of infrastructure or machines that you use in your manufacturing. And I think finally, what's important is, I like the idea, the highlight that was raised by one of the speakers. I think it's our sister from Egypt, around the fact that the media seems to portray women as object of use or as object of seduction, rather than heroes in themselves. And that's a critical thing that needs to change. So our media must. They show that, oh, this woman is very nice, she cooks for her husband, she's very respectful, and all that. So that's the social construct, the mental construct that the media creates in the minds of everyone, that this is how a woman should look like. No, but we need the media to change that narrative and present women as equal as men, with the same rights, with the same ability and skills, that the men have, and even better, to be able to participate and engage in economic activities. I think one of the things I just need to mention here is, and that impacts on the way we view women. So someone comes into the office, a male comes into the office, and we say, hey, how are you? I like what you did yesterday. But the moment a woman comes into the office, you define her by her dress or by her looks. That's not how we should define women. We should define women by their skills, their ability to make impact in people's lives, and help us deliver a better economy. Because women contribute more to the economy than the men, But because of the levels of inequality and the fact that the taxation system, is not supportive of women's rights, then that's why we are seeing that mental construct being developed to the detriment of women. And finally, I like the point that there should be a gender audit of taxes. So when they are doing a review, when the Auditor General or the head of the Revenue Authority is doing an annual review of what they've collected as taxes, part of that should be a gender audit of what tax was collected, how it was collected, how many women paid tax, and where these women were sitting within the economic system, where this tax was collected. And that way we will begin to see women's contribution and the fact that women should be at the forefront of economic development. So thank you, everyone, and I hope we've had a good discussion.
Hello. I was going to ask for another round, so just for me, please, for the ladies and Apollos, you did a very good job. Certainly for me, the conversation was really, really interesting. I don't know a lot about tax, and I can admit that. And I also learned a new word, phenomenomics. How will it go for men? Melonomics? Mainstream, men is mainstream very much. I'm glad you've enjoyed this session. We are heading to the closing session now, and I'm going to invite my closing panelists to the podium. Charity Nchimunya, Executive Secretary of AU-ABC. Dr. Habele Matlosa, Director of Hello. Dr. Habele Matlosa,